Settle in and let your breathing slow, because the quiet you are stepping into is not ordinary quiet. It is the kind that happens when people leave and the land does not miss them. You think you are looking at a peaceful forest, soft fog, wet leaves, and a few empty roads. But you are also walking through rules you cannot see, the kind written into dust, bark, and old concrete. Tonight, with the Sleepless Geographer, you will drift through places that look calm while they quietly change, abandoned streets returning to trees, water patiently unmaking pavement, marshes that swallow footprints, mountains built from pressure, and coasts that never stop falling apart. You take another step, and the forest accepts you the way it accepts everything, without enthusiasm, without protest, without permission. The air is damp, almost sweet, like wet paper and moss. A thin fog hangs between trunks, not dramatic, not cinematic, just present, like a slow breath held in place. You think the danger here would feel loud, sirens, warning lights, a bitter smell. But that is the first lie this place tells you. The risk is ordinary. It sits on leaves. It drifts in dust. It hides in the fine grit that clings to old boots and the cracks of concrete. This is the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, and you are not here to be heroic. You are here to be careful and to notice how quickly the planet resumes its habits when humans step away. The world ended here in a very specific way, through a reactor that ran too hot, too fast, too wrong. In the late 1980s, the nearby city emptied, and time did what it always does. It kept going, not with mercy, not with malice, just forward. You walk along a road that used to mean something. Asphalt, faded to a soft gray, is broken into plates like dry river mud. Grass grows in seams. Birch saplings rise from potholes, thin and stubborn, as if the road is simply a suggestion. And you learn, very quickly, why you would not survive here, even though it looks like any quiet woodland you might wander into on a sleepy afternoon. Because survival is not about scenery. It is about rules. The first rule is simple. You cannot treat the ground like it belongs to you. You cannot sit anywhere you feel tired. You cannot lean on any wall that seems stable. You cannot drink water because it looks clear. You cannot rub your eyes after touching bark or railing or soil. The forest is doing fine. You are the fragile part. Radiation is not a creature. It does not stalk you. It does not chase you through fog. It is a slow, invisible rearranging of cells, a set of dice rolled again and again inside living tissue. And in a place like this, the problem is not one dramatic moment. The problem is accumulation. You can handle a little exposure in the same way you can handle a little sun. But you cannot handle a lifestyle built out of it. You cannot live on berries that grew from contaminated soil. You cannot sleep in a house full of dust that has been settling for decades. You cannot make a home where every storm lifts old particles back into the air. So you move gently, like someone walking through a room full of sleeping animals. Not because the animals will wake, but because you do not want to disturb what has settled. It is strange, the way abandonment changes sound. There are birds, yes, woodpeckers tapping with patient insistence. A crow calling from somewhere you cannot see. But the human noises are gone. No engines, no distant machinery, no soft roar of the endless modern world. In that absence, you can hear the small mechanics of landscape. Water dripping from leaves, wind combing through tall grass, the quiet crack of a branch settling under its own weight. And you start to notice how fast nature rebuilds when it is not being trimmed back. A city is not defeated in one day. It is defeated in layers. First, there is the sudden stillness, doors left ajar, curtains frozen in place, furniture waiting politely for owners who will never return. Then, the weather begins its work. Rain finds the gaps in roofs. Freeze and thaw pry at concrete. Summer heat expands metal, and winter cold contracts it again over and over, like a slow argument. Seeds arrive without ceremony, carried in bird droppings, blown in on wind, dropped from the pockets of passing animals. A single crack in pavement becomes a nursery. A tuft of grass becomes a wedge. Roots push, not with strength, but with time. And time is always stronger than strength. You walk past a fence line where vines have climbed so thickly that the metal is only a rumor beneath green leaves. The fence is still there technically. It is just no longer in charge. There is a particular kind of tree that thrives in this kind of place. Birch, alder, willow, fast growers, opportunists. They love disturbed ground, the kind left behind by construction, and also the kind left behind by evacuation. They do not need rich soil. They need space and light, and humans have provided both by leaving. And you can almost feel the forest knitting itself back together, stitch by stitch. But you do not forget what sits beneath it, not because you can sense it. You cannot. That is the cruelty of it. You can walk into a patch of ground where the contamination is higher, and nothing in your body will flinch. Your skin will not tingle. Your tongue will not taste metal. The birds will keep singing. So the zone teaches you a different kind of caution. You learn to respect maps. You learn to respect measured boundaries. You learn to trust the dull instruments that click when they are unhappy. Congratulations. You have entered a landscape where your senses are no longer the authority. You pass a shallow ditch beside the road, and it is full of dark water. Leaves float on the surface like little boats, motionless. The ditch looks harmless, almost inviting in its simplicity, but it is part of the same system that is reclaiming everything here. Water does not need permission either. It gathers wherever it can. It moves wherever it is easiest. It carries soil away in small, patient thefts. It soaks into foundations, it loosens bricks, it turns a stable path into soft ground. And because there are no maintenance crews now, no one clearing drains, no one patching cracks, water gets to do its job without interruption. You see it in the way the road sags near an old culvert. The edges crumble where runoff has undermined them. In places, the asphalt has collapsed into a shallow dip like a tired mattress. If you tried to live here, this is where the struggle would begin. Not with dramatic danger, with small, constant complications. Your shelter would leak. Your firewood would be wet half the year. Your food would be unreliable and often unsafe. The winter would come early, and the damp cold would get into everything. Clothes, bones, thoughts. And then there's the obvious problem that everyone likes to mention, the invisible one, the one that makes every meal and every nap feel like a gamble. Even animals here live differently than you imagine. They are not immune. They are adapting in the only way life knows how, by continuing anyway. Wolves and boar move through abandoned streets. Moose browse in flooded yards. Birds nest in broken windows. It is tempting to call it a triumph of nature. It makes a nice story. But the truth is less sentimental. Life does not return because it is making a point. Life returns because the competition left. The loudest species packed up and drove away, and suddenly, the habitat got quieter. The land is not celebrating. It is simply using the space. You keep walking deeper into the tree cover, and you start to notice how the forest changes as the ground changes. In low spots, where water lingers, the trees are darker and denser. The air smells heavier. The soil is soft underfoot, a sponge of decaying leaves. In higher spots, the ground is sandy and dry, and the pines begin to appear, needles whispering faintly when the wind passes through. And the fog, always the fog, settles into the lowest places like it belongs there. Fog is not dramatic here. It is just what happens when damp air cools and gives up its moisture. It forms quietly in the way breath becomes visible on cold nights. It makes everything feel closer than it is and farther than it is. At the same time, it softens the edges of buildings too. You come to a structure half hidden behind trees, and for a moment, it looks like a rock outcrop. Then you see the straight lines, the square windows, the old Soviet concrete, stained with years of rain. You step inside, and the air changes immediately. Cooler, stiller, dustier. The floor is scattered with debris, plaster, broken glass, pieces of wood that used to be something useful. Your footsteps are careful, not because the building will attack you, but because it has been falling apart for a long time. And it does not care where you put your weight. A building without people is like a ship without crew. It does not sink all at once. It fails slowly, one neglected system at a time. The roof leaks first, water stains spread across ceilings, mold blooms in corners, wooden beams soften, then sag. Metal rusts, expanding as it corrodes, cracking the concrete that once held it. In winter, water freezes inside hairline fractures and expands. It is called frost wedging, which sounds like a polite woodworking term. In human language, it means water turns into a crowbar and pries your shelter apart. By the time spring comes, the damage is already done. A small crack has become a larger one. A thin seam has become a gap wide enough for wind and rain and seeds. And in a few years, without anyone fixing anything, rooms become compost bins. Floors become gardens. Windows become nests. You look through an empty frame where glass used to be, and you see a courtyard that has become meadow, tall grass, a young tree rising beside a broken swing set. The speed of it is what unsettles you, not because it is spooky, because it is honest. A human city feels permanent when you live inside it. Roads seem like forever. Buildings seem like decisions carved into stone. But abandon them, and the planet treats them like any other pile of materials. Concrete is not eternal. It is a mixture that cracks. Steel is not immortal. It rusts. Paint peels. Plastic becomes brittle. Wood swells and shrinks until it splits. And the forest, with its endless supply of seeds and spores and roots, moves in like water filling an empty glass. If you stayed here long enough, you would start to feel the seasons as a physical pressure. In summer, the greenery would explode, thick and humid. Insects would find every patch of exposed skin. The air would feel alive, crawling with sound. In autumn, the trees would drop leaves in relentless waves, covering everything: steps, cars, playgrounds, until the human shapes become rounded, softened, almost buried. In winter, snow would arrive and make everything look clean. That is another lie this place tells. Snow is just a blanket. It hides debris. It muffles sound. It makes collapse quieter. And beneath it, the same slow processes continue. Water freezing, thawing, draining, seeping into places it should not be. In spring, meltwater would run through streets like temporary rivers, collecting in basements, turning lower rooms into cold pools. Without pumps, without drainage maintenance, the water wins. You step back out into the open air and you feel the forest again. Damp and patient. There are places in the zone where the contamination is higher, where the soil holds on to particles like a memory it cannot forget. It is not evenly spread. It was never evenly spread. Wind carried fallout in narrow bands. Rain pulled it down in patches. Low areas collected it. Some ground is relatively safe to pass through, and some is not. So you walk as if the landscape has invisible bruises. And you think about how difficult that would be as a daily life. Imagine trying to be relaxed when every comfortable habit is questionable. You cannot sprawl in the grass. You cannot gather mushrooms with confidence. You cannot let a child play in dirt. You cannot even sweep a floor without lifting dust into the air. The zone is not one constant level of danger. It is a mosaic, a quilt stitched from weather patterns, soil types, and the shape of the land. Even the trees participate in this quiet sorting. Some contaminants bind to certain soils. Clay holds onto particles more than sand. Organic matter can trap them in the top layer. In wetlands, where decay is slow, the ground can store a kind of dark inventory. So when you look at a forest floor here, you are also looking at chemistry. And still, you keep moving. Because movement feels safer than settling. The road you follow becomes narrower, more broken, more swallowed by plants. You notice how the ditch beside it has become a guiding line for water. This is the beginning of the second lesson, the one the zone teaches, with puddles and potholes. Water does not stop working when people leave. It keeps falling from the sky, tapping on leaves, rolling off needles, collecting in low spots. It keeps finding the easiest path downhill, even if that path used to be a street. And in places like this, where the ground has been disturbed by construction, water has an advantage. The soil is compacted in some places, loosened in others. Buried pipes and trenches create channels. Old foundations block flow and redirect it. So rain does what it always does. It searches, it tests, it probes every crack like a thief checking doors. A single storm can push water under a slab of asphalt. Then winter comes, and that water freezes. When water turns to ice, it expands, not gently. It forces space where there was none. It lifts pavements slightly, just enough to create a bigger gap for the next rain. This is how roads become riverbeds, not all at once, not with drama, with repetition. The landscape here is mostly flat, or softly rolling. That matters. In steep terrain, water runs off quickly, carving channels and carrying debris downhill. In flatter terrain, water lingers. It spreads out. It sinks in slowly, saturating the soil until the ground becomes soft. You step off the road for a moment onto what looks like firm grass, and your boot presses down farther than expected. The earth gives way slightly, like a tired sponge. That softness is not just inconvenience. It is danger, the boring kind. A soft field can hide old debris, rusted metal, open holes, collapsed cellar entrances covered by plants. In the zone, it can also hide contaminated sediment that settled in low places after rain. And because water moves things, it moves that sediment too. It collects it in ditches. It deposits it where flow slows down. It builds tiny fans of mud at the mouth of culverts. If you wanted to survive here, you would need to become a water reader. You would need to look at the land the way a river does. Where is the low ground? Where would runoff collect? Where would the snowmelt go? Where would the spring floods creep? Because floods are not stopped by fences or signs. They move through abandoned towns as easily as through forest. You come to a place where the road dips slightly and the forest opens into a shallow basin. The air feels cooler here. The fog thickens. You can smell standing water before you see it. A series of puddles has joined into a long, dark ribbon. The ditch has overflowed, and now the road itself is becoming a channel. You watch water slide over broken asphalt so slowly it almost looks still, but it is moving. It is always moving. In human terms, a river is often described as calm or peaceful, but that is only because it is not trying to impress you. A river is a demolition crew that never clocks out. It carries sand and silt and bits of broken rock. And those particles scrape the bed and banks, grain by grain. It undercuts the outside of bends. It drops sediment on the inside, building bars and islands. It changes course in slow negotiations, and sometimes it changes course in one impatient night. In the zone, even small streams do this work. They rearrange the edges of abandoned fields. They pull soil from under old road beds. They flood basements and then drain away, leaving a thin film of mud behind. That mud dries. It becomes dust. And dust here is not just dust. It is a place where the invisible risk likes to travel. So you keep your hands to yourself. You keep your boots out of puddles when you can. You do not kneel. You do not lie down. You do not do the normal, comforting things a tired human wants to do in a quiet forest. Congratulations. You have found a landscape that refuses to let you relax properly. And still, it is beautiful in its indifferent way. The trees are tall. The undergrowth is thick. The air is cool enough to feel clean. A faint breeze moves through the canopy, making the leaves flicker like small coins. You pass an old drainage channel, straight as a ruler, cut through the earth decades ago to dry out land for farming or roads. It still works, even now. Water still prefers the easiest path, and a human-made trench is an invitation. This is one of the stranger truths of abandoned places. The human infrastructure keeps shaping nature long after humans are gone. A ditch becomes a stream. A canal becomes a wetland. A road becomes a ridge that blocks water on one side and drains it on the other. Even a cracked parking lot can become a pattern of little ponds, each one a tiny habitat. Insects lay eggs, frogs find them, birds come to feed. The ecosystem reorganizes around the new shape of water, and you begin to feel the pivot happening inside your mind. At first, the exclusion zone is about absence, empty apartments, silent schools, a city without its owners. But after a while, you realize it is also about processes that never needed us. Water, frost, root growth, decay, the chemistry of soil. The zone is not frozen in time. It is moving constantly with slow determination. You follow the watery low ground a little farther, and the land becomes softer. The trees shift again. You see more reeds, more sedge, plants that like wet feet. The ground darkens. The air is thick with the smell of rot. Not unpleasant, just honest. And you realize you have been walking toward an edge. Not the edge of a map, the edge of solid ground. Because follow water long enough, and it will lead you into places where land is only pretending to be land, places where every step is a question, and the answers are not always kind. And as the broken road behind you disappears into fog and birch trunks, you start noticing the smaller flows, ditches, puddles, and the patient way water rearranges everything, until the forest gives way to something softer, flatter, and quietly hungry. The ground changes first, before the view does. One moment, you have something like a road under you, cracked and stubborn, still pretending to be useful. The next, the surface becomes a patchwork of reeds and dark water, and the land starts answering your weight with a slow, wet sigh. You think a marsh is just a shallow pond with plants, a messy inconvenience. Wrong. A wetland is a machine for holding water in place, and it does not care what you plan to do tonight. Your boots find peat, not quite soil, not quite compost, more like the planet's storage drawer. It is springy in a way that feels friendly, until you remember springy ground is just ground that has not decided what shape it wants to be. Step carefully, because in a marsh, the safe path is not the straight one. The safe path is whatever happens to be held together by roots, fallen branches, and pure luck. And the air does something subtle here. It thickens. Not in a dramatic, haunted way, in a practical way. The kind of thickness that comes from water everywhere, evaporating slowly, then giving up and turning back into mist the moment the temperature drops. Mist loves wetlands because wetlands are lazy with heat. Water warms slowly, cools slowly, and that delay makes the air unstable in the gentlest possible way. Warm, damp air slides over colder water, and suddenly the world loses its sharp edges. Distance becomes unreliable. A tree line that looks 10 steps away might be 50. A patch of open water that looks shallow might be a channel deep enough to swallow your leg and keep it. You keep moving anyway, because standing still in soft ground is how you begin to sink without noticing. The marsh does not attack. It simply accepts you steadily, the way a mattress accepts a tired body, except this mattress is cold, and it never gives you your warmth back. Wetlands form where water can't leave easily. Sometimes the land is flat, so there is no downhill worth mentioning. Sometimes the soil is clay, packed tight, refusing to let water drain through. Sometimes the water table sits high, like the whole region is already saturated and has no more room for rain. And sometimes humans did it on purpose. Old drainage projects cut channels through these landscapes, trying to turn wet ground into fields. Over decades, those channels clog, collapse, or get overwhelmed. Beavers arrive with their own opinions. Vegetation fills in. The land remembers what it used to be. So you wade through a place that was once told to behave and is now quietly back to being itself. The plants here are specialists, reeds with hollow stems that move in wind like a slow choir, sedge that doesn't mind standing in water all day, moss that builds thick carpets over time and doesn't need your approval. And beneath them is peat, layers of dead plant matter pressed down in oxygen-poor water where decay can't finish its job. In normal dry soil, fallen leaves rot fast. Fungi and bacteria break them down, returning nutrients to the system like a well-run kitchen. In wetlands, water fills the spaces between soil grains, and oxygen has trouble getting in. Without oxygen, decay slows to a crawl. So the marsh keeps its receipts. Year after year, plants grow, die, and pile up. Slowly they compress into dark layers, like a book written in leaves. If you cut down into peat, you can sometimes see old stems, old roots, old fragments of a world that looked slightly different. This is why wetlands are time capsules. They preserve pollen, seeds, even wooden objects. In some places on Earth, peat bogs have held human bodies for centuries, skin tanned by acids, faces still recognizable enough to make you uncomfortable. Congratulations, you are walking on a landscape that remembers everything and forgets almost nothing. Here, in the quiet marsh beyond the swallowed road, you notice how sound changes. The forest had branches to break the wind. The marsh has open space, so the breeze can slide low and smooth. Rippling the water and combing through reeds, you hear insects too, a thin, persistent whine. Mosquitoes, midges, the small airborne tax collectors of wet places, they do not care that you are tired. They do not care that you are careful. They only care that you are warm. And you would not survive here easily, not because the marsh is dramatic, but because it is constant. Your clothes would never fully dry. Your fire would always be a negotiation. Your feet would soften, then split, then blister. Even in mild temperatures, wet ground steals heat from your body faster than dry air ever could. Cold water is efficient like that. It pulls warmth away, as if your comfort is a debt. It is the same reason a mild day can turn dangerous when you are wet and still. Hypothermia does not require snow. It only requires you to be damp, exposed, and not paying attention. You look down at the water and see a film of floating plant bits, tiny leaves, and broken stems. It is easy to imagine it is clean. It is not clean. Wetland water is full of life and decay and chemistry. Acids from peat, tannins from leaves, microorganisms doing their endless work. And here, in this particular region, water also has another job. It moves particles. Whatever settled into the soil decades ago does not stay neatly put. Rain lifts it, floods spread it. Sediment traps it again. Wetlands are excellent at collecting what the landscape sheds, which is good if you are a bird looking for habitat, less good if you are a human hoping to drink without consequences. So you do not drink. You do not rinse your hands. You do not splash your face. You let thirst be a small discomfort instead of a large mistake. You follow slightly higher ground, a narrow ridge made of sand and old roots, the kind of raised line that forms when water sorts the land. The ridge is only a little higher, but in a marsh, a little is everything. That small rise changes the plants. Fewer reeds, more shrubs, young trees daring to take hold. And you can tell where the ground is firmer by how the trees stand. In deep peat trunks lean, roots don't anchor well. In firmer soil, trees rise straighter, and their branches spread with more confidence. Even here, the land is giving you instructions. If you know how to read them, mist thickens again, sliding through the shrubs. It is not fog from a distant weather system. It is local, made right here by damp air cooling over wet ground. This is one of the marsh's quiet tricks. It makes the world smaller. Your brain loves distance. It likes horizons and landmarks. It likes to know where it is. Mist takes that away gently and leaves you with a softer, more uncertain map. And uncertainty is tiring. You keep your pace slow because rushing in a marsh is how you find the deep channel. Wetlands often have hidden cuts where water actually moves, narrow but deep. They can be old stream paths or drainage ditches disguised by plants, or animal trails turned into water corridors. One step is firm, the next is a sudden drop. So you test before you trust. You shift your weight carefully. You treat the ground like it might be lying to you, because it is. This is not paranoia. This is basic wetland literacy. Somewhere ahead, you hear a bird call you do not recognize immediately. Then another. The marsh is full of birds because it is full of food. Fish, insects, amphibians, small mammals, hiding in reeds. This is why wetlands matter even when humans complain about them. They are nurseries. They are filters. They are sponges that hold floodwater and release it slowly. Drain a wetland, and you get more farmland. Yes, for a while, you also get faster floods, dirtier rivers, and a landscape that becomes brittle in drought. And in a place with no maintenance crews, no pumps, no constant human effort, wetlands return like a default setting. You come to what used to be a straight channel, an old drainage line, cut into the land like a ruler mark. It is still there, but it has softened. The edges are slumped. Plants have colonized the banks. Fallen branches have made little dams. Water has started to meander inside the human-made line, because water always tries to turn straight into curved. Curves are stable. Curves spread energy out. Curves are how rivers avoid doing too much work at once. A straight canal is like forcing water to march. Eventually, it gets tired of marching and starts drifting sideways, chewing at the edges, making its own path. You watch the surface where the current moves, barely visible, a few bubbles, a slow slide of duckweed, a leaf traveling with lazy purpose. And you remember, water is never just scenery. It is a conveyor belt. It carries silt, and it carries whatever silt likes to hold onto. In some places, that is nutrients. the good kind of cargo. In other places, it is the leftovers of industry or agriculture or disaster. The marsh does not judge. The marsh collects. You step around the channel and find a patch of ground that rises again, just enough to feel like relief. The air shifts, slightly less humid. The plants thin out. The soil becomes less black, more brown. That small change feels like stepping out of a heavy blanket. And now, with firmer ground under you, you can start to notice something else. The way the entire region is shaped by water, not just the obvious puddles. Even the forests are arranged by drainage. Trees like pine prefer sandy, well-drained soil. Alders tolerate wet feet. Willows thrive along edges. So, the map of vegetation is also a map of water movement, drawn in living ink. If you were trying to survive, this would matter. Wet ground is food-rich, but it is also disease-rich. It is hard to build on, hard to travel through, hard to stay warm in. Dry ridges are easier for travel and shelter, but food can be sparse, and water can be farther away. Survival is always trade-offs. The landscape is a menu, and every option has a price. You keep moving along the higher line, and gradually the wetland begins to thin. The ground stops wobbling under your feet. The air stops clinging to your skin. But the marsh does not end cleanly. It fades out in patches, like an old stain. One last pool of dark water sits among grasses, still and reflective. The surface is so calm, it looks like polished stone, a perfect mirror, until a small insect touches down and the whole reflection breaks into rings. And it hits you. In the quiet way these thoughts arrive, wetlands are not just places. They are thresholds. They sit between forest and river, between land and lake, between solid and liquid. They blur categories. They make you admit that Earth does not really do sharp boundaries, not unless humans force them, and even then, not for long. You walk on, and the land slowly becomes more certain. The trees shift again. Taller pines, more open understory. The soil underfoot turns sandy, gritty. It drains quickly, and the surface feels lighter, less heavy with water. And because the ground is drier, the temperature feels different too. Not warmer exactly, just less cold at the edges. Less heat being stolen. You come across a small rise that gives you a view over the wetland you just crossed. In the mist, it looks endless, a pale quilt stitched with darker lines of shrubs and water channels. From here, it seems gentle. That is another lie distance tells you. Up close, marshes are labor. They are slow progress and constant attention. They are insects and damp and the steady threat of stepping wrong. And even if you crossed one safely, living beside it would grind you down in quiet ways. Mold in your shelter, wet gear, rotting supplies. A fire that refuses to stay lit. The marsh does not have to kill you quickly. It can just make you tired enough to make one mistake. You turn away from the wetland and you notice another feature that humans left behind. A line of raised ground, long and straight, disappearing into trees, an old rail bed, maybe, or a service road built up with gravel. It sits above the wet ground like a narrow causeway. These raised lines become lifelines in abandoned regions. They stay dry longer. They offer easier travel. Animals use them too. You see tracks in soft spots, boar, deer, maybe a fox. The planet reuses whatever shapes are available. You step onto the raised gravel, and it crunches softly. The sound is almost comforting because it is predictable. Solid ground speaks in crisp noises. Soft ground speaks in silence. As you walk, you think about how water chooses paths and how those choices write the future. If enough water flows the same way for long enough, it cuts a channel. If it cuts deep enough, it becomes a stream. If the stream keeps gathering water, it becomes a river. And if the river persists through centuries, it becomes the spine of a region, shaping where forests grow, where soil accumulates, where humans build, and where they fail. A river is not just water moving downhill, it is a landform in progress. Even here, with no people to maintain banks or dredge channels, the water keeps adjusting its course. It undercuts one side, deposits on the other, makes a bend sharper, then eventually cuts through in a flood and leaves an oxbow, a crescent lake that will slowly fill with reeds. The cycle is slow enough to feel like stillness, but it never stops. You pass a place where the raised gravel dips slightly, and you see fresh evidence of that persistence. A small washout where water has eaten away the edge. The gravel has slumped down like spilled cereal. Plants are already taking hold in the damp cut. This is what happens when humans stop repairing. Gravity gets promoted, and it is not personal. It is simply the job description. You keep to the higher ground and watch the landscape subtly dry out. The air becomes clearer, mist thins. The sky above is a pale smear behind clouds, and for a moment you can see how flat the region really is. This is part of the broader geography here, a low plain shaped by ice. Long ago, you cannot see the glaciers anymore. Not in this century, not in this latitude, not in this season, but the flatness, the sandy patches, the wet depressions, the scattered lakes, these are all signatures left behind by ice that once covered the land like a heavy hand. Glaciers scrape, grind, and rearrange. When they melt, they leave messy deposits, sand, gravel, clay, dumped in ridges and fans. They leave basins that become wetlands. They leave a land that drains poorly because it was never smoothed into a neat slope. So the marsh you crossed is not just an accident of recent rain. It is an old wound in the terrain, a hollow left by ancient ice now filled with water and plant matter. The past is doing more work than the present. And because the land is low and flat, rivers here tend to wander. They braid, they meander, they spill into floodplains. Water doesn't rush, it lingers. It takes its time, which means anything carried in water also has time to settle. That is why lowlands are often fertile, and also why they are good at collecting trouble. You keep walking, and the gravel line leads you towards something harder. At first, it is just a change in how the trees grow. They thin out slightly, and the ground begins to rise. Not dramatically, just enough that your calves notice. Then you see exposed stone. Not much, just a few outcrops where soil is thin. Gray rock with rough texture, flecked with lichen. It feels like a different world already. Soft landscapes make you cautious about sinking. Hard landscapes make you cautious about falling. And as you climb, you notice the way your breathing changes. Not because the air is thinner here. Not yet. because climbing asks more of you than walking on flat, wet ground. You step around a fallen tree, and the roots are torn from the earth, lifting a plate of soil and stones. The underside is pale and raw, like the land's skin has been peeled back. This is another quiet process you can only appreciate in abandoned places. Tree fall becomes geology. When a tree uproots, it drags soil uphill, exposing deeper layers. It creates pits that fill with water. It creates mounds that dry out faster. Over centuries, repeated treefall can slowly churn a forest floor, mixing layers, moving sediment, changing drainage. The forest is not just sitting on the land, it is stirring it. You keep climbing, and the ground becomes reliably firm. The plants change again, fewer reeds, more pine needles underfoot. The smell shifts to resin and dry sand, and you feel in your bones that you are leaving the wet edge behind, but you carry the lesson with you. Water is patient. Water is everywhere. Water shapes everything, even when it is not obvious. It seeps, it freezes, it expands, it loosens, it drags. And now, as the land rises and hardens, you are about to meet the other side of that shaping, the part that does not yield softly. Rock. Because if you want solid ground again, you have to climb into it. And climbing means meeting stone that was built by pressure, time, and a little cruelty. The slope ahead is gentle, but the texture under your boots is changing. More gravel, more exposed fragments, pieces that crunch and slide, eager to roll back downhill. And somewhere up there, beyond the pines and the thinning mist, the land stops being a sponge and starts being a stack of broken bone. A place that looks permanent from far away and up close is always in the middle of falling apart. The first real rock you meet is not a heroic cliff. It is a scatter of angled fragments, a gravelly skin where the hillside has started shedding itself. You step onto it and it shifts impatiently, like it would rather be lower down. That is one of the quiet truths of mountains. Even before you see a summit, the mountain is already trying to become flat again. From a distance, high ground looks calm and finished. Up close, it is a construction site that never closes, with gravity as the foreman and weather as the night shift. The ground under you is a mix of sand, pebbles, and sharp chips of stone. Some pieces are fresh, pale at the break, like teeth. Others are darker and rounded, the older ones that have been knocked around long enough to lose their edges. You learn quickly that your path is not choosing the mountain. The mountain is choosing your path. You follow weakness. You follow seams. You follow where water used to run, where ice used to pry. You follow the places where the rock admits it is tired. In human language, this is called a trail. In geological language, you climb through a band of pines, and the trunks thin out. The soil gets shallower, and the roots begin to show themselves, winding over stone like knuckles. Roots do not crack boulders by brute force. Not at first. They start in hairline fractures, where a seed landed and survived. Then the root thickens over years, pressing outward with steady pressure. It is slow, polite vandalism. Add water to that fracture, and the process gets meaner. Rain seeps in, meltwater seeps in, then a cold night arrives and the water freezes. Ice takes up more space than liquid water, and it expands inside the crack like a wedge. Frost wedging again, the same basic trick you saw destroying roofs and pavement, now used on mountains. The planet does not waste a good method, so the rock breaks, flake by flake, season by season. Stones tumble downhill, scree fields form, those slopes of loose rock that whisper under your feet. And this is where the mountain stops being poetic and starts being practical. Loose slopes are exhausting. Every step forward slides half a step back. Your ankles work harder to stabilize. Your calves burn with the constant correction. Congratulations, you have reached terrain that makes walking feel like negotiating with marbles. You pause, not because you are out of breath in the dramatic thin air way yet, but because your body is already spending extra effort just staying upright. And in that pause, you notice how the air feels different than the marsh. Up here it is drier, the humidity drops, and the cool is sharper. The wind has more room to move, and it finds you more easily. Wind is not just air moving past your ears. Wind is the atmosphere trying to smooth out differences, warm and cold, high pressure and low pressure, sunlit slopes and shaded gullies. Mountains create differences constantly. They force air upward. Rising air expands and cools. Cool air cannot hold as much water, so it lets moisture go. That is why one side of a mountain can be wet and green, while the other side can be dry and thin. The rain shadow effect. It sounds like a nice place to nap. It is actually the reason deserts sit beside mountain ranges, looking unfair and offended. Even on modest hills, you feel the beginning of that pattern. The windward side holds more moisture, more moss, more lush undergrowth. The leeward side dries out faster, with dustier soil and tougher plants. You keep climbing, and the trees begin to look smaller, not because they are young, but because the conditions are stingier. Higher ground means thinner soil, stronger wind, colder nights, and a shorter growing season. The forest loosens its grip. It stops being a wall of green and becomes clusters, then stragglers, then nothing at all. The transition has a name: the tree line. It sounds like a border you could draw neatly on a map. In real life, it is messy, a slow negotiation between temperature, wind, and how much suffering a tree can tolerate. Above that line, plants hug the ground. They grow low, compact, as if trying not to be noticed. They trade height for survival. You step around a patch of exposed stone, and the rock has a different texture now, layered, like pages pressed together. When it breaks in plates. That is a clue about its history. Some mountains are built from sedimentary rock, old seabeds and river deposits hardened into stone. Sand becomes sandstone. Mud becomes shale. Layers stack over time like laundry you never folded, except with pressure instead of shame. Other mountains are made of igneous rock, cooled magma, tougher and more crystalline. And some are metamorphic, rock that was changed by heat and pressure until its original identity became complicated. Metamorphic rock is the earth putting something through enough stress that it becomes something else. Relatable, honestly. You run your glove over a surface that glitters faintly, tiny crystals catching the dull light. That shimmer could be mica, a mineral that forms in sheets. It tends to show up in metamorphic rock, the kind made deep in the crust where pressure rearranges minerals like furniture in a cramped apartment. And that brings you to the lie mountains tell. They look like piles of rock that have always been there. But mountains are usually the result of collisions, slow, grinding impacts between pieces of Earth's crust. Tectonic plates bump into each other like two shopping carts meeting in a parking lot. Except the carts are continents, and the collision lasts tens of millions of years. When plates converge, something has to give. Sometimes one plate dives under another, a process called subduction, and that can feed volcanoes. Sometimes the crust crumples and thickens, folding like fabric pushed from both sides. That thickened crust rises because it is buoyant compared to the mantle below. Isostasy, the crust floating on hotter, softer rock like an overloaded raft. Mountains are the crust trying to find balance after being shoved and wrinkled. And the moment they rise, erosion starts dragging them back down. Wind, water, ice, and gravity. The four steady hands that never stop pulling. You take a step higher, and a small stone skitters away, clicking down the slope until it disappears into the soft hiss of loose rubble. That sound is a miniature version of an avalanche. Not the dramatic wall of snow you see in films, but the everyday kind. Rockfall, the constant shedding of slopes, the mountain trimming its own edges. Rockfall happens when cracks widen, when ice expands, when roots pry, when rain loosens the glue of sediment. It can happen without warning, because the warning is usually silent. A slope holds itself together until it does not. Then, gravity collects its payment in one quick transaction. This is why you do not linger beneath steep, fractured walls. You do not set up camp in a chute, those narrow gullies that funnel rocks like a bowling lane funnels balls. Mountains have favorite paths for things that fall. You do not want to be one of them. You keep moving along a ridge where the ground is more stable. The stones here are larger, packed tighter. It feels safer though. You know better than to trust feelings too much tonight. The view opens gradually, not a sudden reveal, but a widening of space. You can see the lowland behind you now, the flat, damp plain where marsh and forest blend together. From up here, it looks smooth, almost gentle, like a blanket laid out. But you remember how it felt under your feet, how it swallowed weight and hid channels. Distance always makes things look easier. The wind picks up as you climb. It combs through your clothes, finds gaps, steals heat. Wind chill is just the atmosphere being rude. It strips away the thin layer of warmth your body keeps near your skin, replacing it with colder air again and again. You can be above freezing and still lose heat fast just because the wind refuses to let you keep any. And it is not only cold that changes quickly here. Mountains make their own weather because they force air to behave. Clouds form on slopes. Fog pours over passes like spilled milk. A sunny ridge can be a stormy ridge in less time than it takes to regret leaving your jacket behind. This is why mountain forecasts are often more of a suggestion than a promise. You climb past a shallow hollow where snow might linger late into spring. Even without seeing snow, you can tell where it would sit in shaded pockets, behind boulders, on the north-facing side where sunlight is stingier. Those patches matter because they feed water slowly into the soil. They create wet spots in otherwise dry terrain. They carve tiny channels that become streams lower down. Snow is a water bank account, and the mountain cashes it out gradually. And if you ever had to survive here, that would be one of your main problems. Water is everywhere in the lowlands, but often questionable. Up here, water is cleaner, but harder to find. You look for signs: greener vegetation, a line of willows, a damp sheen on rock where water seeps out. Springs often appear where water moving underground hits a layer it cannot pass. It travels through porous rock, then meets clay or dense stone, and spills out sideways. The geology decides where thirst can be solved. You follow a shallow seam in the rock, and your boots step on stone that feels smoother, polished in places. That polish can be a glacier's signature. Long ago, ice moved over this region. Not a delicate dusting, but a thick, heavy sheet. Glaciers carry rocks frozen into their base, and as they slide, they grind the ground beneath them like sandpaper. They leave scratches called striations. They leave smoothed bedrock called glacial polish. They leave ridges of dumped debris called moraines. Even if the ice is gone, its handwriting remains. You stop and look at a rounded boulder resting oddly on the slope. It does not match the local rock. That could be a glacial erratic, a stone carried from somewhere else and dropped here when the ice melted. A misplaced object left behind by a force too big to argue with. The boulder sits there quietly, like it belongs. And that is another lie. It is a traveler from a different bedrock neighborhood. The glacier delivered it and moved on. Congratulations, you have found the planet's version of clutter, an item left in the wrong room 10,000 years ago. As you climb higher, the slope steepens. The rocks become more jagged, more fractured, and you realize something else about mountains that people rarely say out loud. They are full of weak points. A mountain is not one solid mass. It is broken by joints, faults, bedding planes, and fractures. It is stitched together by old damage. Faults are cracks where rock has moved past rock. Some faults are ancient, quiet now. Some are still active, slipping in tiny increments, building stress, releasing it in earthquakes. Even in places without famous quakes, the crust is rarely perfectly still. It shifts, it settles, it adjusts. Earthquakes are just the moments when the adjustments become loud enough to notice. You imagine standing here at night, feeling a slight vibration through your boots. Not thunder, not traffic, just the ground reminding you it is not furniture. The higher you go, the more you see the mountain structure. Layers folded, tilted, sometimes nearly vertical. It is like looking at the inside of a cake that got crushed sideways. Those folds tell a story of pressure. They are evidence that rock can behave like something softer when it is stressed slowly enough. Over millions of years, rock flows. It bends. It deforms. It is not liquid, but it is not as rigid as your intuition wants. Time changes the rules of materials. You crest a small rise and find a flatter shelf, a place where the slope eases and the stones are packed into a rough terrace. This is a good place to notice how the mountain is being dismantled. You see small piles of debris beneath a cliff band, fresh rockfall. You see a narrow gully where rain concentrates, carrying pebbles downward. You see a patch of lichen slowly colonizing bare stone, starting the long process of turning rock into soil. Lichen is not one organism, but a partnership, fungus and algae living together. It survives on bare rock, secreting acids that break down minerals. It is a slow chemical bite. Add freeze-thaw cycles, add wind-blown dust, add plant roots, and soil begins to form, a thin skin on stone. So even on a mountain, life is doing its part to unmake rock. It is oddly comforting. In a bleak way, nothing stays sharp forever. Not peaks, not edges, not the things that hurt. You walk on, and the air feels cooler again. The wind slides over the ridge with a steady push. At this height, even a small mistake can become expensive. Not because the mountain is angry, but because it is indifferent. A twisted ankle is not a minor inconvenience when the terrain is uneven and the nearest shelter is just a rumor. A small cut is not just a cut when everything is dirty and the temperature drops at night. Exposure is the mountain's most common weapon. Not dramatic, just persistent. And thin air, even before you reach truly high elevations, you can feel a difference in effort. The atmosphere gets thinner as you climb. There are fewer air molecules, and that includes fewer oxygen molecules. Your lungs can still fill, but each breath contains less of what your blood wants. Your body compensates by breathing faster, heart beating harder. It is subtle at first, then less subtle, then suddenly you realize you are panting over something you would barely notice at sea level. Altitude sickness is your body complaining about the shortage. Headache, nausea, dizziness, sleep disruption. Sleep disruption, mountains even steal rest. Congratulations, you found a landscape where even lying still can feel like work. You keep your pace slow, because slow is how you last. The ridge curves, and you see a narrow notch ahead, a pass where the wind seems to gather. Passes are low points and ridges, and they become wind tunnels. Air wants through, and the mountain's shape forces it to accelerate. As you approach, the wind gets louder, a steady rush like distant surf. You step into the notch, and the gust hits you with a cool slap. It tugs at your clothes, pushes at your balance. You lean slightly into it, instinctively, like you are walking against an invisible crowd. On the far side of the pass, the landscape changes again. The slope drops into a valley, and the valley has the smooth, wide shape of icework. A U-shaped valley, carved by a glacier that once filled it, dragging its heavy belly along the floor. Rivers carve V-shapes, narrow and pointed. Glaciers carve U-shapes, broad and blunt. The valley floor looks flatter than it should at this height, with steep walls rising on either side, and you can almost picture it, the ancient ice, thick and slow, creeping downhill, grinding rock, carrying debris, leaving behind a trough that now funnels wind and water. You begin descending slightly, and you find a small stream, cold and clear, slipping over stones. It is fed by seepage and lingering snow patches higher up. It runs with a steady quietness, and it looks harmless. But you remember what water does. Even a small stream is a tool. It picks up grit and carries it. It undercuts banks. It deepens its channel. It becomes, eventually, part of a river system that will move mountains one grain at a time. This stream is young, but it is already doing the same job as the big ones. It is just taking smaller bites. You follow it for a while because it gives you a natural line through the terrain. And as you walk, you notice the rocks in the stream bed are more rounded. Water tumbles them, smooths them, makes them easier to hold but harder to grip with boots. Stream crossings are where people get surprised, not because the water is deep, necessarily, but because wet rocks are slick and cold water numbs feet quickly. A simple slip can become a sprain, and a sprain can become a night out here, and a night out here can become a story someone else tells. So you step carefully, placing your weight slowly, feeling for stability. The stream murmurs, and the sound is calming in a way that almost makes you forget where you are. Then you see the undercut bank just downstream, where the water has been carving beneath the soil, leaving a fragile lip. It is a small reminder, quiet but firm. Nothing here is finished. The valley narrows, and the stream quickens slightly, dropping over a small ledge, a miniature waterfall, no taller than your knee, but energetic. Waterfalls often form where there is a change in rock hardness. Hard rock resists erosion. Soft rock wears away faster. The hard layer becomes a cap, and the water spills over it. Over time, the softer rock behind the fall erodes, the cap breaks off, and the waterfall retreats upstream. Slowly, it saws a notch into the land. This is how gorges begin, not with one dramatic cut, but with a persistent lip moving backward. You keep moving, and the terrain becomes rough again. Boulders scattered like the remains of something shattered. This could be a talus field, debris piled beneath a cliff from countless rockfalls. Talus is unstable. Each step can shift stones. Larger rocks can wobble, balanced in ways that seem impossible until you touch them. And here is another mountain reality. Night makes everything harder. In the dark, you cannot read the ground well. You cannot see loose stones. You cannot see the edges of drops. You cannot see the weather building over a ridge. Mountains do not become more dangerous at night because they change. They become more dangerous because you lose information. So you imagine trying to survive here with limited light, limited gear, limited energy. Your shelter would be whatever you could find behind a boulder or under an overhang. Your warmth would depend on staying dry and blocking wind. Finding firewood above tree line is difficult because trees have already given up. Even if you find small shrubs, they burn fast and poorly. Water is cold, and in cold environments, drinking enough becomes strangely hard because your body does not feel thirsty the same way. And food is sparse unless you know exactly what you are doing, and even then, you are burning calories, just existing. Mountains are beautiful, yes, but beauty does not keep you alive. Routine does, planning does, and the mountain does not care whether you brought enough of either. You climb again, following the valley up toward another ridge. This ridge is barer. The rock is more exposed, the soil thinner. You see a face of stone with a long crack running across it, like a scar. It is probably a joint, a natural fracture line. Water will find that crack. Ice will widen it. Eventually, a block will detach. Someday, maybe during a storm, maybe during a thaw, maybe during a quiet night when nobody is watching, the rock will let go. The block will fall, strike other rocks, break into pieces, and add itself to the talus below. Mountains fall apart the way old buildings do, only slower and with fewer witnesses. You reach a higher shoulder where the wind is steady, and you can see far enough to notice something else. Beyond these ridges, the landscape shifts again. The horizon is not endless peaks. It flattens, then rises in a different shape. A broad plateau, perhaps, or a distant volcanic cone. And that thought, heat under the surface, begins to return. Because not all mountains are made the same way. Some are collision scars. Some are uplifted blocks. Some are built by lava, layer upon layer, a mountain made of eruption and time. Even here, you can find hints of that deeper heat. The rock under your boots has pockets of darker material, maybe basalt fragments mixed into older stone. Or you see a slope with a strange, ropey texture, like cooled tar. Volcanic landscapes have their own handwriting. Basalt is often dark, fine-grained, formed from lava that cooled quickly at the surface. It can form broad plateaus from flood basalts, or steep cones from repeated eruptions. And volcanic rock can make soil that is rich once it breaks down. That is why people farm near volcanoes and pretend it is a reasonable long-term plan. You keep walking, and the wind brings a faint scent that is not quite pine, not quite wet soil, mineral sharpness. It might be imagination, or it might be the subtle smell of stone warmed by a rare patch of sun. And you begin to think about what happens when the pressure beneath the crust finds a path upward. Volcanoes are not just mountains with lava. They are vents for the planet's internal heat. Earth is warm inside because of leftover heat from formation and heat from radioactive decay in the mantle. That heat makes rock behave like a very slow fluid over geologic time. In some regions, the crust is thin, or it is being pulled apart. In others, a subducting plate adds water to the mantle, lowering the melting point and creating magma. Magma rises because it is less dense than the rock around it. It collects in chambers. It stalls. It cools. It sometimes finds a crack and moves again. Volcanoes are plumbing problems on a planetary scale. And humans? Humans build nearby because the land is fertile. The scenery is good, and the hazard feels abstract until it is not. You continue along the ridge until the stone underfoot becomes more consistently dark. The fragments look porous in places, full of tiny holes. That texture can come from gas bubbles trapped in lava as it cooled. Vesicles, the rock's frozen breath. You pick your way over it, and it is sharper than the metamorphic stone earlier. It breaks into angular pieces that cut boots and skin. Lava fields are like that. They look solid from a distance, but they are chaos up close. Frozen waves, jagged crust, cracks hidden in shadow. If you tried to cross one in low light, it would be slow and painful. You would spend energy just finding safe footholds. And the worst part is that the rock holds heat differently than soil. In the day, it can bake under sun. At night, it can radiate cold. Your temperature swings with the stone. You drop slightly into a sheltered hollow where the wind eases, and you notice the ground feels subtly warmer. Not warm like a heater, not enough to be comforting. Just not as cold as it should be. That could be nothing, a trick of shelter and reduced wind. Or it could be a reminder that volcanic regions often have geothermal heat leaking upward. Hot springs, steam vents, fumaroles, places where groundwater meets hot rock and returns to the surface changed. In some places, you can see the steam rising. In others, it is hidden until you step into the wrong depression and find the air oddly warm, oddly damp, smelling faintly of minerals and sulfur. Sulfur smells like rotten eggs, which is nature's way of telling you to leave. You move onward, and the ridge opens into a broad field of dark stone that looks like it was poured and then shattered. This is where the land truly starts to feel like it has a temper. Volcanic terrain often looks fertile around the edges. Ash breaks down into mineral-rich soil. Forests grow thick. Farms appear. People relax. But the core of it, the lava flows, the cinder fields, those are reminders that the ground can be liquid, and it has been liquid recently enough to leave fresh scars. You walk across the rough surface, and each step lands on irregular angles. Your feet work constantly. Your balance never settles, and you think about towns built near volcanoes and how calm they can look. Streets, gardens, schools, life arranged as if the mountain behind them is a scenic backdrop, not a loaded mechanism. The good news, people say, is the volcano has not erupted in hundreds of years. The bad news is that is exactly how long it takes to reload. Magma does not rush. It accumulates. It builds gas pressure. It changes chemistry. Sometimes the eruption is gentle, a slow spill of lava. Sometimes it is explosive, ash and pumice and pyroclastic flows. Fast, hot clouds of gas and rock that hug the ground and erase everything in their path. Pyroclastic flow is an awful term because it sounds technical and distant. In human language, it means you cannot outrun it, you cannot hide from it, and you will not have time to understand what is happening. You keep to the edge of the dark field where patches of lighter soil support small plants. These pioneers, tough grasses, low shrubs, are the first to colonize broken lava. They catch dust. They trap moisture. They begin the long work of making something like soil again. This is how volcanic landscapes heal, if you want to call it healing. First, bare rock, then lichen, then thin plants, then thicker vegetation. The process is slow enough that a human can live and die without seeing much change, which is why humans love pretending the world is stable. But the planet is always transitioning between states, volcano to forest, forest to ash, ash to soil, soil to farmland, farmland to abandonment. The cycle does not require your participation. You reach a place where the ground dips and you hear a faint hiss. At first, you think it is wind through a crack, but it is steadier than wind and warmer, a small vent, barely more than a hole in the ground, breathing steam into the cool air. The steam curls upward, disappearing quickly. The rock around the vent is stained yellowish in spots, mineral deposits left behind as gases escape and cool. You stand near it, and the warmth touches your hand through your glove like a very distant promise. Geothermal heat is comforting until you remember what it implies. It means the crust here is thin enough or fractured enough for heat to reach you. It means water is circulating down into hot zones and returning. It means the system is active. Not necessarily erupting tomorrow, not necessarily erupting in your lifetime, but active in the same way a sleeping animal is active. Still breathing, still alive, still capable of sudden movement. Earthquakes often accompany this activity. Small ones, sometimes too small to notice, as fluids move and pressure shifts, and even a modest quake can be enough to trigger rockfalls on steep slopes or to open new cracks that change where water flows. In a volcanic region, the ground can rearrange itself without ever producing lava. You walk away from the vent and find a smoother patch of stone. It has a wrinkled texture, like thick liquid that cooled mid-motion. This is Pahoehoe lava, one type of basaltic flow, known for its ropey surface. The other common texture is AA, which is rough, clinkery, sharp. Volcanologists have a sense of humor, apparently. You step across the ropey stone, and it feels strangely organic, like the ground once moved, because it did. And when you stand on lava rock, you are standing on time that was once molten. You are standing on a moment when the Earth's interior reached the surface and cooled into a new skin. That skin cracks, it weathers, it breaks down, it becomes soil again. But it never stops being evidence. You continue, and the wind shifts, bringing a faint haze that looks like distant smoke. It could be mist, low cloud clinging to slopes. Or it could be something else. Volcanic gases in a low spot, pooling because they are heavier than air. In some volcanic areas, carbon dioxide can collect in depressions and suffocate animals that wander in. Carbon dioxide is polite like radiation. It does not announce itself. It does not smell strongly. It simply replaces the oxygen your lungs are expecting. In places like that, you can find dead insects, dead birds, sometimes larger animals, all lying in a hollow that looks harmless. Congratulations! You have found a landscape where even the air can be wrong. You keep to higher ground, avoiding depressions. You notice how instinctively you begin reading terrain again, just like in the marsh. In the marsh, you avoided soft spots and hidden channels. Here, you avoid cracks, loose slopes, and low hollows that might collect gas. Different environment, same lesson. Survival is just learning which invisible rules apply in which place. You climb a final rise, and the view opens to a broad slope of ash-colored soil, dotted with sparse vegetation. Ash is not like household ash. Volcanic ash is pulverized rock and glass, sharp and abrasive. It can irritate lungs and eyes, clog machinery, and collapse roofs when it piles up wet. But ash also breaks down into fertile soil over time. So volcanic regions often have a strange dual character. On one hand, the land is rich. Crops grow well. Forests can be lush. On the other, the land is built around a hazard that can reset everything. People live here because the ground feeds them, and they leave when the ground decides to eat the town instead. You keep moving along the ash slope, and your boots leave clear prints. The surface is loose, and it slides slightly, a miniature landslide under each step. Loose volcanic material can fail easily in heavy rain. Lahars, volcanic mudflows, can form when ash and debris mix with water and surge downhill like wet concrete. They can happen during eruptions, when snow and ice melt quickly. They can also happen years later, when heavy rain hits unstable slopes. A volcano can keep harming people long after it stops erupting. just by leaving behind loose material in steep terrain. You walk carefully because slipping here would mean a messy slide, skin scraped by gritty particles. And as you descend the ash slope toward lower ground, you notice the air getting drier again. The vegetation thins further. The wind feels different, less damp, more abrasive. It carries fine dust that settles on your clothes, your hair, the edges of your face. And now the world begins to pivot again, away from heat, away from steam, towards something that does not burn, but still destroys. Wind. Because when volcanic rock cools and breaks into sand, when ash becomes dust, when soil dries out and vegetation thins, the atmosphere takes over the job of shaping, not with water this time, with abrasion, with transport, with the endless quiet sanding of exposed ground. You walk over a low ridge and look out at a broader, emptier stretch of land ahead. The colors lighten, more tan, more pale gray, less green. It is not a classic desert of towering dunes yet, but it has the early signs: open ground, sparse plants, and that particular brightness that comes from sunlight reflecting off dry surfaces. You can feel the moisture leave the air. Your lips dry faster. Your throat tightens slightly with dust. The wind picks up, and you hear it move across loose grit in a soft whispering scrape. The sound is almost gentle until you remember what it means. Each grain that moves is a tiny tool, sanding rock, stripping surfaces, carving patterns that only become visible after thousands of years. Wind erosion is slow enough to be boring, which is exactly why it wins. And you keep walking toward that open, dry expanse, feeling the ground become less forgiving in a different way, as if the planet has decided that, instead of sinking, your problem will now be thirst. Dry land is honest with you in a way wetlands never were. It does not pretend to hold you. It simply refuses to help. Your steps stop sinking, yes, but now every movement costs moisture, and moisture is the one currency you cannot print more of out here. The sun feels closer, not because it is, but because there is less between you and it. Fewer leaves to soften it. Fewer damp surfaces to cool the air with evaporation. The ground reflects light back up at your face, pale and indifferent, and the horizon starts to look like a blank page you are expected to cross on foot. You notice it first in your mouth. Your tongue feels slightly too large, like it is taking up space it did not used to need. Your lips dry at the edges. The air itself seems to ask for water as it enters you, and you can almost feel it leaving again every time you exhale. Deserts are not defined by heat. Not really. They are defined by absence. Not much rain, not much humidity, not much forgiveness. Some deserts are hot enough to shimmer, yes. Others are cold, windy plateaus where snow falls and still somehow never adds up to a wet place. Because the snow sublimates, it turns straight from ice into vapor, vanishing into air that is too thirsty to wait for melting. So when you walk into a desert, you are not just walking into a temperature, you are walking into a budget cut. Water enters the system rarely, and when it does, it leaves quickly. The sun spends it, the wind steals it, the ground swallows it, plants hoard it in waxy skins and spines, and animals learn to do their living at night, when the air is cooler and the rules loosen slightly. You keep moving across ground that looks flat from a distance, but up close, is textured with small ridges and shallow bowls. The wind has been sorting the surface for a long time, pushing lighter grains into one place, leaving heavier fragments behind like a rough gravel armor. That armor has a name: desert pavement. It forms when wind removes fine particles and leaves behind pebbles and stones, a tight, protective layer that slows further erosion. It is the landscape doing what humans do with blankets, covering itself to reduce loss. But the wind still finds edges. It still finds loose corners. It still finds the parts that are not protected. You feel it in your eyes first, the fine grit that arrives with each gust. Not enough to hurt, just enough to remind you that wind is not empty. It is carrying a load, and the load is made of tiny tools. When sand moves, it does not glide, it hops. Saltation, that is the term. One grain lifts, jumps, lands, and knocks another grain loose, a chain reaction of small, bouncing impacts. It is like popcorn, except the popcorn is quartz, and the microwave is the entire atmosphere. Some grains are light enough to stay suspended, turning into dust storms. Dust can travel far, crossing seas, fertilizing distant forests, tinting sunsets. The desert exports its missing pieces, grain by grain, to places that never asked for them. And then there are dunes, the shapes everyone expects. But dunes are not piles of sand sitting patiently waiting to be photographed. They are moving structures, migrating with the wind like slow animals. A dune has a gentle side, the windward slope, where grains climb and creep upward, and it has a steep side, the slip face, where sand avalanches down at an angle that feels almost too precise. The angle of repose, the steepest slope a pile of dry grains can hold before gravity pulls it into motion. So you watch a dune, and it seems still. But it is constantly rearranging itself, always near the edge of sliding. One gust, and the surface ripples. One night of steady wind, and the crest has shifted. One season, and the whole dune has walked forward like a patient threat. If you tried to navigate through dunes without a strong sense of direction, you would learn a particular kind of panic, the kind that arrives when every hill looks identical and every valley hides the next identical hill. There are no landmarks that stay put. Even your footprints do not last. The wind edits them out. Congratulations, you found a place that refuses to remember you. The temperature swings feel unfair. Daytime sun is sharp, and it can bake your skin quickly because there is little moisture in the air to soften the heat. But when the sun drops, the ground loses warmth fast. Dry air does not hold heat well. The sky becomes a cold, open lid, and the night can bite hard enough to make you miss the cruelty of noon. That is the desert's rhythm, hot and cold, bright and dark, generosity and withdrawal. Not a steady punishment. You pass a channel that looks like a small riverbed. It is dry now, full of stones and pale sand, and it winds through the open ground with the casual confidence of something that knows it will return. This is the wash, the wadi, the arroyo. Different names in different places, same idea. It is water's handwriting, left behind during rare storms. Dry riverbeds are honest in a way people rarely appreciate. They do not pretend water is always present. They show you exactly where it goes when it shows up and they warn you quietly not to sleep there, because deserts are dry most of the time. But when rain comes, it comes with drama. A storm can hit far away in the mountains, and you might not even see it, but the runoff will find this channel. It will arrive as a wall of muddy water, heavy with debris, moving fast over ground that cannot absorb it quickly. Flash floods in deserts are not contradictions. They are the logical outcome of hard ground, sparse vegetation, and sudden rain. The soil often has a crust, baked and compacted. Water cannot sink in fast enough, so it runs and it gathers and it becomes a moving problem. You imagine being tired, deciding the dry riverbed looks sheltered, the banks offering a little windbreak. You imagine falling asleep there, thinking you are safe because the sky above you is clear. Then, the flood arrives from upstream in the dark, carrying branches and stones and the sound of the entire desert cashing its water check at once. So you stay out of channels. You stay on higher ground when you can. You learn to respect empty places because empty places are often just waiting for their season. Wind and water take turns shaping this world. Water does the rare heavy lifting, cutting channels, moving boulders, dumping fans of sediment at the base of slopes. Wind does the daily sanding, lifting dust, nudging dunes, polishing exposed rock. In some deserts, you find stones shaped by wind abrasion, benefax, faces and edges carved into rock as sand blasts one side more than another. The rocks look manufactured, as if someone took a file to them for years, which, in a way, someone did. The atmosphere did. You walk past a low cliff of pale stone, and the surface is pocked with small holes and shallow alcoves. In dry regions, chemical weathering still happens. Even when water is scarce, minerals dissolve in thin films of moisture, then crystallize again as it evaporates. Salt can grow in pores and cracks, expanding like ice does, breaking rock from the inside. Salt weathering? It is like frost wedging's drier cousin, doing the same job with a different tool. If you taste the air near some desert basins, you can almost sense the salts. Old lake beds that dried out, leaving behind crusts of minerals, white flats that glare under sunlight, reflecting so much brightness you squint without realizing. Playas, salt pans, places where water arrived, lingered, and then left everything behind. They look smooth and safe until you step onto the wrong one and realize the surface can hide mud. A thin crust over a soft underlayer, waiting to take your boot and keep it. The planet loves making traps that look like convenience. You keep walking, and you feel how survival here becomes mostly timing. You move early in the morning when it is cooler. You rest in whatever shade exists, which is often not much. You cover skin, not just for warmth, but to slow moisture loss and reduce sun exposure. You ration effort the way you ration water. And water? Water becomes math. Not the exciting kind of math, the dull, constant kind. How far to the next known source? How much you sweat per hour? How much you can carry without exhausting yourself faster? How much you lose just by breathing? In very dry air, you can dehydrate quietly. You do not feel drenched, so you do not realize how much you are losing. Sweat evaporates before it gathers. The desert steals evidence. And if you get behind on hydration, your thinking gets slower. your decisions get worse. You become less capable of noticing how capable you are not. That is how deserts win. Not with one big moment. With a sequence of small deficits, you see a plant clinging to a patch of rocky ground, low, tough, gray-green. It looks half dead, which in a desert is not an insult. It is a strategy. Many desert plants reduce leaf surface area to limit transpiration. Some have tiny leaves, some have spines. Some drop leaves entirely during drought. Some store water in fleshy tissues. Some have roots spread wide to catch brief rains. Others drill deep to tap groundwater. They are not thriving in the way humans mean it. They are enduring efficiently. Animals do the same. Many hide in burrows during heat, emerging at dusk. Some get moisture from food instead of drinking. Some have kidneys that concentrate urine intensely, saving water with a level of internal discipline you would admire if it was not happening inside a mouse. You keep going until the land begins to slope very gently downward. Not a dramatic descent, just a change in how your feet feel gravity. This is how many deserts organize themselves: basins and ranges. Higher areas shed sediment, lower areas collect it. Over long time, mountains erode, and their debris forms aprons at their base, alluvial fans spreading like open hands of gravel and sand. When multiple fans merge, they form a broad sloping plain called a bajada. It is one of those words that makes geography sound like a dance move, but it is really just the desert flattening itself by redistribution. And when you follow that flattening long enough, you start to feel another change in the air. A different kind of moisture, a different temperature softness. Not a sudden shift, just a hint. Like the world is exhaling something cooler. The wind that has been sanding you all night begins to carry a faint saltiness, barely noticeable at first, then unmistakable once you recognize it. Sea air, because if you follow wind long enough, it eventually meets the ocean. And the ocean, of course, has been doing its own patient work this whole time. You crest a low rise and the ground ahead drops away, opening into a wide view where the horizon is flatter than land usually allows. The light looks different there, more reflective, more metallic. Water at scale changes the color of the sky. It bounces light upward, creating a softer brightness near the horizon. Even before you see waves, you can often see that glow. Then you hear it, a steady sound that is not wind, not insects, not your own footsteps. A long, repeating hush, like breathing too large to belong to any one body. The sea. You approach the edge cautiously, because coastlines are not gentle borders. They are impact zones. From a distance, the ocean looks calm and finished. Up close, it is a moving surface that never stops negotiating with rock. The coast is where the planet spends energy. Waves are energy traveling across water, generated by wind, far away. The water itself mostly stays in place, rising and falling in loops, but the energy moves forward until it hits land. Then it has to go somewhere. It goes into lifting water up cliffs. It goes into slamming it back down. It goes into pushing pebbles and sand, grinding surfaces. It goes into exploiting cracks and weaknesses, the way water always does. You stand near a cliff edge and look down at dark water chewing at the base. Not constantly dramatic, just persistent. Each wave arrives, impacts, retreats, and leaves behind a thin, temporary wetness that shines on stone. It does not look like demolition, but it is. Hydraulic action is one method. Water forced into cracks, compressing air, widening fractures over time. Abrasion is another. Sand and pebbles thrown against rock, scraping it like a belt sander that never gets tired. Chemical weathering joins in too, especially in limestone coasts, where slightly acidic seawater dissolves rock slowly. And then there is the simplest force of all, gravity. Waves undercut cliffs. They carve notches at the base. The cliff overhang grows until it cannot support itself. Then one day, without announcement, a section collapses. You do not need an earthquake. You do not need a storm, though storms speed it up. You just need time. The cliff falls, and the sea takes the rubble and begins grinding it down. Large blocks become smaller blocks. Smaller blocks become cobbles. Cobbles become pebbles. Pebbles become sand. The coastline eats rock and produces beaches as waste. And beaches are not fixed places. They are moving inventories. Sand travels along shore, pushed by waves arriving at an angle. That movement is called longshore drift. Each wave carries grains up the beach face. Then gravity pulls them back down more directly. The net effect is sideways transport, grain by grain, like a slow parade. So a beach is not just sand sitting there, it is sand in transit. This is why people build houses near beaches and then act surprised when the beach relocates. The shoreline migrates, sometimes gradually, sometimes overnight. A storm surge can push waves farther inland, eroding dunes, stripping sand from the beach, dumping it offshore in bars. The morning after can look calm, even beautiful. But the map has changed. Coasts fall apart in increments, and humans are very bad at noticing increments. You walk along a stretch of shore where the sand is darker, mixed with small stones. The sound under your boots is soft at first, then crunchy where pebbles cluster. The tide is partway out, leaving wet sand that reflects the sky like a dull mirror. Tides are not waves. They are the ocean's slow tilt, pulled by the moon and, to a lesser extent, the sun. Water bulges toward the moon, and on the opposite side of the earth as well, because physics enjoys being unintuitive. As the earth rotates, coastlines pass through these bulges, and the sea level rises and falls. The effect is a daily rhythm, a breathing of water over land. In some places, the tide range is small. In others, it is enormous, exposing wide mudflats and then covering them again. Mudflats look harmless, like wet ground you could cross. But mudflats can be traps. Fine. Sediments hold water and behave like thick paste. You step in and suction grips you. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink. Not dramatically, but insistently. And then the tide returns. Coastal danger is often just timing again. You continue along the shore toward a headland where the rock is exposed. The layers are visible in the cliff face, tilted and folded, telling an older story than the waves. But the waves do not care about the story. They care about the weak lines. Sea caves form where water focuses on a fracture. Caves can become arches when they cut through a headland. Arches can become stacks when the arch collapses. Stacks become stumps when waves wear them down. It is a whole life cycle of rock measured in storms and centuries. You stand and watch a wave enter a shallow cave, and for a moment, the sound deepens, a hollow boom, like the coastline is coughing. Spray lifts and falls back, salty and fine. Salt sticks to your skin and dries there, leaving a faint tightness. And you think about how humans respond to this, how they build seawalls and groins and breakwaters, trying to pin the coast in place like a rug corner. Sometimes it works locally for a while. Often, it just moves the problem down shore. A groin traps sand on one side, building a wider beach there, but it starves the next stretch, increasing erosion. The coast does not stop moving. You just redirect a budget. Sea level rise adds another layer, not a sudden drowning, not usually, but a gradual shift that changes where waves break and how far storms can reach. Even small increases can translate to significant shoreline retreat on low coasts. The sea does not need to climb much to claim a lot, and coasts can also rise, isostatic rebound again, the land lifting after being freed from the weight of ice sheets. In some places, the ground is still rising from the last glacial maximum, which sounds dramatic until you remember it is happening at the speed of patience. So, at the coast, you stand between forces moving in opposite directions. Water rising, land adjusting, waves chewing, sediment drifting, storms rearranging. It is never stable. It only looks stable on a human weekend. You walk past driftwood piled above the high tide line. Each piece is a traveler carried by currents, storms, and rivers. Some might have been trees from inland forests. Some might have broken off cliffs. Some might have floated for months before landing here. The beach is a sorting place. Light things pile high. Heavy things settle low. Plastic gathers with kelp because it is buoyant and persistent. A modern mineral, the ocean is still learning how to bury. You keep going until the air grows cooler again. The kind of cool that arrives when moisture increases. The sea is generous with evaporation. Water rises into the air, unseen, and the wind carries it inland. As night deepens, that moisture can condense into fog along coasts. Marine layer, a low blanket of cloud formed when warm air moves over cold water and chills. Fog makes the shoreline feel smaller. Sound carries differently. The waves become a constant presence, and the horizon disappears. It is easy to forget that the ocean is not just a surface. It is depth, pressure, currents, and cold. Cold water along some coasts comes from upwelling, wind pushing surface water away, allowing deeper water to rise. That deep water is nutrient-rich, which feeds plankton, which feeds fish, which feeds birds, which feeds coastal economies that pretend the system will always be generous. Upwelling zones are some of the richest marine regions on Earth. They are also often foggy and chilly because cold water cools the air above it. That is why you can have a desert near an ocean, cold current along shore, stable air, little rain inland. The Atacama, the Namib, places where the sea sits nearby, and yet the land remains dry because the atmosphere refuses to lift and rain. You are always standing inside systems stacked on systems. The fog thickens as you move away from the breaking waves and toward a river mouth. The sand becomes darker and damper, You see bits of plant debris, reeds and sticks, carried down from inland. River meets sea here, and neither fully wins. Estuaries form in these places, brackish water, part fresh, part salt. Tides push in, rivers push out. Sediment drops where the flow slows, building mudflats, marshes, deltas. These are fertile places, and humans love fertile places. Cities often grow near estuaries for trade, fishing, and easy movement inland. And they flood, constantly, historically, reliably. Because building on a delta is building on a pile of river mud that wants to spread out and sink, while the sea waits patiently for storms. Still, you stand at the edge and listen to water move past itself, currents sliding in different directions. You follow the river upstream a little, away from salt. The air loses some of its bite. The ground becomes more vegetated again. And you notice something subtle. The river is carrying pale, silty water, likely from upstream erosion. That sediment will settle somewhere, perhaps here, perhaps farther inland, in a bend, perhaps out at sea. Either way, it is the same story again. Land is always traveling, just slowly. And then, as you keep walking, the temperature drops in a way that does not belong only to night. It is a deeper cool, a cleaner cool, like air that has been stored in shade for a long time. You begin to feel it coming from inland, drifting down valleys. Cold air drainage. At night, air cools on slopes and sinks into low areas like invisible water. It pools in basins. It forms frost pockets. It makes valleys colder than ridges. But this feels bigger than that. This feels like you are approaching a place that manufactures cold. You follow the river farther, and the stones along the bank become smoother, more rounded, as if they have been ground more aggressively than a normal river would manage. The valley widens, with steep walls that look scraped, U-shaped again, that old glacial signature returning like a refrain. You start seeing it in the far distance first, a pale brightness that is not sky, a dull, matte white tucked between darker rock. Ice. It does not look like a river. It does not look like a lake. It looks like a sleeping thing, heavy and still. But you know better now. Stillness is often just slow motion. A glacier is a river of ice, flowing downhill under its own weight. Snow falls, compacts, turns to firn, then to dense ice. The glacier thickens, and the pressure makes it deform and creep. It moves by internal deformation, the ice crystals rearranging, and by sliding at the base, when meltwater lubricates it. It can crack and groan. It can surge forward faster in some years. It can retreat in others. You approach the edge of the ice, and the air around it feels different, chilled and damp, in a way that makes your skin tighten. The glacier is a cold reservoir, cooling the air above it, generating katabatic winds that flow downslope, cold and steady. You can feel those winds on your face, as if the glacier is exhaling. The surface is not smooth. It is broken, with shallow ridges and dirty streaks where debris rides along. Rocks and dust settle on the ice, darkening it, helping it absorb more sunlight, increasing melt. This is one of the glacier's bleak tricks. It carries the very material that helps destroy it. You step closer, and you see meltwater streams on the surface, thin and bright, cutting into the ice. The water disappears into a crack, a moulin, a vertical shaft that funnels meltwater down into the glacier's interior. It is strange to watch water vanish into ice, like the glacier has plumbing. Down there, the water can reach the bed, reducing friction, helping the glacier slide. Meltwater can speed a glacier temporarily, like oil on a stubborn hinge. You hear a sound, a sharp crack, distant but clear. Not thunder, not rockfall, ice shifting. Glaciers make noises that feel too loud for something that moves so slowly. Crevasses open with sudden snaps. Blocks calve off into water with booms. Internal stresses release. The ice is not dead, it is stressed. You stand at the edge where the glacier meets bare ground. The transition zone is messy, full of debris. This is the moraine, the ridge of rocks and sediment the glacier pushed or carried and then dropped. Moraines can form along the sides, along the middle where two glaciers merge, at the end where the ice pauses long enough to pile material. They look like hills, but they are not bedrock hills. They are heaps. Walk on a moraine and you walk on unstable rubble, stones of all sizes stacked without cement. Water runs through it easily. Slopes can fail, rocks can shift. It is like a landfill made of geology, and the glacier has been grinding the bedrock beneath it into fine powder called rock flour. That powder makes meltwater look milky, a pale turquoise in some lakes, because tiny particles scatter light. Glacial lakes are beautiful in a way that feels unfair. They look calm, glassy, inviting, but they can be cold enough to steal your breath immediately, and they can drain suddenly if an ice dam fails, sending floods downstream. In places where glaciers retreat, they leave behind unstable landscapes, loose sediment, new lakes, slopes no longer supported by ice. Permafrost adds another complication. Ground that stayed frozen for years, sometimes centuries, can thaw as temperatures change. When permafrost thaws, the soil loses strength. Roads buckle. Buildings tilt. Landslides increase. It is called thermokarst when thawing permafrost creates collapsing ground and new ponds. It looks like the land is melting, because it is. If you built a town on permafrost, you did it by assuming the ground would stay frozen. That assumption is becoming less reliable. You walk along the edge of ice and think about the scale of time here. A glacier can carve a valley over tens of thousands of years. It can transport boulders across regions. It can flatten mountainsides into smooth forms. It can leave behind erratics, moraines, drumlins, eskers. Eskers are particularly strange. Long, winding ridges of sand and gravel deposited by meltwater streams flowing beneath the ice. When the glacier melts away, the stream bed remains as a raised snake of sediment. It is the inverse of a river turned inside out. You imagine standing on an esker in a flat landscape, a natural raised road that curves and twists, telling you where water once flowed under a roof of ice. The planet loves leaving behind evidence that looks like a prank. You continue past the glacier's edge toward a higher, colder section where the ice surface is cleaner, less debris. The light reflects softly, and your eyes adjust to the whiteness. In the far quiet, sound travels in a different way. A small clink of stone seems louder. Your footsteps crunch on old snow at the margin. A distant crack echoes. Cold air is dense and stable, and it can carry sound farther, especially over flat ice. You begin to understand why cold preserves things. Not just bodies and bogs, not just wood and permafrost, but footprints, tracks, mistakes. In cold, decay slows. Bacteria work less efficiently. Chemical reactions slow down. Things remain recognizable longer. A rope left on ice can reappear years later as the glacier moves, the past delivered to the surface like delayed mail. You stand and look at the glacier, and it feels like looking at memory made physical. It holds winters compressed into layers. Each year, a thin band of snowfall compacted and buried. Ice cores drilled from glaciers and ice sheets can tell scientists about past atmospheres. Tiny bubbles trapped in ice preserve ancient air, allowing measurement of past carbon dioxide levels, past methane, past temperature proxies. The glacier is a library written in cold. And now, as you turn away from the ice and begin descending again, you feel the shift that always comes when ice loosens its grip. Meltwater increases, streams run fuller, sediment moves, plants colonize newly exposed ground, animals follow, humans follow too eventually, because humans cannot resist new land, even when it is unstable. You find a stream fed by meltwater, cold and fast. It cuts through loose sediment, carving quickly because the material is unconsolidated. The banks slump easily. The channel migrates. Braided rivers often form in glacial outwash plains, multiple shallow channels weaving around gravel bars, constantly rearranging. These rivers are messy because the sediment load is high. The water cannot carry it all in one channel, so it splits, drops material, then finds new paths. Braided rivers are the opposite of tidy. They look like a map that could not make up its mind. You follow one channel until it merges with another, and you see the outwash plain stretching ahead, a wide gray fan of gravel and sand deposited by meltwater over time. It is flat, open, and deceptively difficult to cross. The ground is loose, the channels shift, and there is little shelter from wind. But it is also a place where new soil will eventually form. Fine particles settle in quiet areas. Plants take hold on stable bars. Over decades, shrubs appear. Over longer time, forests can return. The retreat of ice is not just loss, it is reorganization. And somewhere in that reorganization, you begin to feel a pull back toward where you started tonight, not geographically, but conceptually. Because abandoned places and post-glacial places share a mood. Both are landscapes in transition, where human plans are either absent or irrelevant, and nature is busy reassigning space. You leave the outwash and follow a line of trees that looks like it might mark firmer ground. The forest edge feels familiar again, damp smells returning, softer footing, and as the land lowers, the air warms slightly and the world becomes less stark. You start noticing small signs of human presence again, not active, but leftover. A rusted post, a broken line of fencing, concrete fragments half buried. You can always tell where humans have been by the straightness of certain scars. The trees become denser, and the undergrowth thickens, and then, through gaps, you see it, a structure that does not belong to the forest. A low building, half swallowed, a roofline softened by moss. windows gone, replaced by darkness. And suddenly, the night feels like it has circled back to the exclusion zone's particular quiet. Not the clean quiet of snow and ice, but the occupied quiet of abandoned rooms. You step closer and see peeling paint, concrete spalling, the rebar inside rusted and exposed like bone. Nature has been working on it patiently, with water and frost and roots. You would think the hardest part of abandonment is the emptiness, but the hardest part is what takes its place. Tall grass fills courtyards, shrubs rise through floorboards, trees root in basements where water collects, balconies become perches for birds, attics become dens for foxes. The city does not stay a city, it becomes habitat, and habitat does not require safe dust. You walk along a street that is still visible, though broken. The asphalt is heaved in waves where roots pushed from below. Puddles sit in low spots, reflecting broken facades. It looks calm enough to forget what it is. This is why you would not survive here easily, even now, even after everything you have learned tonight about water, wind, coast, and ice, because the danger in the zone is not a predator you can scare off. It is routine. It is the way you would want to sit down on a stairwell to rest. And that stairwell is coated in dust. It is the way you would want to sleep indoors, out of rain and wind, and indoors is where particles accumulate. It is the way you would want to sweep and clean. And cleaning is how you lift contamination back into air. You can avoid a cliff edge. You can avoid a flash flood channel. You can avoid thin ice if you are careful. But avoiding dust is a full-time job. You step inside a doorway that used to have a door. The interior air is cooler, stale. Your footsteps disturb a fine layer on the floor, and you freeze, because that is exactly the problem. Dust in abandoned places is not just dead skin and plaster. It is pulverized building material, soot, soil tracked in, and in this particular zone, a possible carrier of radionuclides. Cesium-137, strontium-90, names that sound like distant bureaucrats, but behave like unwelcome guests in living bodies. Cesium can act like potassium, spreading through soft tissues. Strontium can behave like calcium, settling into bones. The specifics matter to scientists and doctors, but the practical result for you is simpler. You do not want it in you, so you back out slowly, and you keep moving through open air instead, where dilution is your friend. Outside, nature has been making choices with enthusiasm. A line of saplings grows along what used to be a sidewalk seam. The concrete cracked just enough for roots to exploit. Vines climb stairwells, moss carpets shaded walls. Fungi fruit from damp wood. There is a particular smell to decay in abandoned places. Wet paper, mold, rust. It is the smell of materials returning to simpler forms. Concrete is especially interesting here because it looks so permanent. But concrete is porous. Water seeps in, reaches steel reinforcement, and rust expands. Expansion cracks concrete from inside. Pieces flake off. Edges crumble. This is spalling, the building shedding layers. In freeze-thaw climates, it accelerates. Water enters pores, freezes, expands, and breaks the surface. The same old trick again. The planet only needs a few tools. It just uses them everywhere. You walk past an apartment block and look up at balconies stacked like shelves. Some have collapsed, slabs fallen at odd angles. Others hold small birch trees, improbably growing from accumulated soil and leaf litter. A balcony tree is one of the zone's signature images, life taking the high ground where it can. But if you imagine trying to live here, that tree is not a symbol. It is a problem. Roots widen cracks. Weight stresses already weaken slabs. Water collects in planters that used to be decorative and now are structural hazards. Every year, more freeze-thaw. Every year, more rust. Every year, another small failure. Buildings do not die suddenly. They get tired. And tired structures are unpredictable. You step around a section of pavement that has sunk, revealing a dark opening, a manhole without a cover, or a collapsed utility access, now hidden by weeds. That is another survival issue in abandoned zones. The ground hides holes. In maintained cities, hazards are marked, repaired, fenced. Here, they wait. You keep your eyes down, and that means you miss the beauty of the tree canopy overhead, which is exactly how these places steal your attention. They force you to focus on the immediate, because the immediate is where mistakes happen. You pass a playground, the metal frame of a swing set rusted, but still standing. Grass has grown tall around it, and small trees rise through the sandpit. It would be easy to make this sentimental, but the geography of it is more interesting than the sadness. Without mowing, grasses grow tall, then fall, adding organic matter to soil. Shrubs establish, then pioneer trees. Over time, if left alone, the area can transition toward forest again, depending on soil and seed sources. This is secondary succession, ecological recovery after disturbance. The disturbance here was evacuation. The land did not need to heal from humans leaving. It simply needed to stop being interrupted, and the wildlife takes advantage. You see tracks in mud near a puddle, cloven hooves, likely deer or boar. You hear a rustle in brush and catch a glimpse of something moving low, maybe a fox slipping away. In the exclusion zone, animal populations have increased in some ways because hunting and agriculture stopped. Wolves, for example, have been documented in the region. So have lynx, boar, deer, and many birds. It is not that radiation is good for them. It is that the absence of people is good enough to outweigh some of the harm. The zone is not a pure wilderness. It is a rewilding experiment imposed by disaster. And it comes with complicated outcomes. Some studies suggest certain species show genetic damage or health effects in higher contamination areas. Others emphasize that population-level impacts are less clear and that habitat availability matters enormously. What is clear, in practical survival terms, is simpler again. You do not get to eat freely here. You do not get to forage like a happy woodland story. Mushrooms can accumulate radionuclides. Berries can carry contamination. Fish in some waters can be contaminated. Wild game can carry radionuclides in mussel. You could starve in a place full of green because the green is not automatically yours. So you keep walking, hungry in the background, but safer that way. You approach a building where the roof has partially collapsed, leaving a jagged opening. Rain falls through that opening, making a damp patch inside where plants have grown. It is a tiny indoor wetland now. Moss, small ferns, maybe even a sapling. Water always finds its way back into structures, and once it does, the building begins transitioning into soil. You run your gaze along the wall and see faint lines of old posters peeling away. Paper does not last here. Ink fades. Adhesives fail. The past unglues itself. In one corner, there is a stack of books, swollen with moisture. The pages are warped, stuck together, a kind of pulp. Knowledge is not immune to mold. You step back out and continue along the street, and the evening light, whatever is left of it, sits low and gray. The zone's danger becomes most persuasive when things look normal. A patch of dry ground that seems fine to sit on, a clean-looking windowsill, a flat rock, a sheltered doorway. Normal instincts tell you to rest, to touch, to lean, to make yourself comfortable. The zone punishes comfort through accumulation. So you keep your hands clean, and your time limited, and your habits unnatural. That is why you would not survive here long term. Not because you would instantly collapse, but because you would slowly slip into routine, and routine would betray you. Even your shelter options are bad. Sleeping outside exposes you to cold, rain, insects, and the basic hardship of being outdoors. Sleeping inside exposes you to dust, mold, and unstable structures. Building a new shelter requires materials, tools, and time is exposure. And then there is the problem of water again. You can find water everywhere, but finding safe water is another matter. Surface water can carry sediment. Sediment can carry contamination. Wells might be safer in some contexts, but accessing them, maintaining them, and verifying safety is its own project. So the zone remains what it is, a place you pass through, not a place you settle into, unless you have systems and support and a plan. You walk toward a wider avenue, and trees line it like a forgotten boulevard. Their branches reach across, forming a canopy that makes the street feel like a tunnel. In the middle distance, you see the silhouette of larger structures, apartment blocks, industrial buildings, and the faint geometry of cranes or towers. You recognize the feeling now. This is the geography of abandonment. Straight lines softened by growth, open spaces becoming meadow, concrete becoming cracked garden bed. And all of it is being driven by simple forces. Water enters cracks, freezes, expands. Roots exploit weakness. Wind deposits seeds. Rain feeds plants. Gravity pulls down what can no longer hold itself up. The same processes shaping mountains and coasts are shaping this city too, just at a different scale. That is the uncomfortable comfort of it. The Earth does not have special rules for human places. Human places are just places where the material palette is different. Instead of cliffs, you have walls. Instead of talus slopes, you have piles of brick. Instead of river channels, you have gutters and ditches. But water still flows. Frost still wedges. Wind still sands. Life still colonizes. You pass a stairwell where water has run down the steps, leaving mineral stains like pale tears. In the damp corner, a small plant has grown, leaves reaching toward light. It is not romantic. It is just opportunistic. You stop at the edge of a square where pavement has buckled into waves. In the center, a shallow depression holds standing water, reflecting the skeletal outline of a building. This is how cities return to wetlands, slowly, as drainage fails. Pumps stop, ditches clog, culverts collapse, water table rises, basements fill, the lower floors become damp, then moldy, then structurally compromised. Abandoned cities often sink into their own hydrology. In the zone, that process is accelerated by the lack of repair and the region's naturally poor drainage. Flat terrain, high water table, lots of seasonal moisture. So you stand in a place that used to be designed to keep water away, and you watch water reclaim it anyway. And then you hear something small, a drip from a broken pipe, still leaking after decades, fed by rainwater seeping into the system. A single drip, repeating. It is the sound of infrastructure becoming a cave. You turn away from the square and keep moving because you know better than to linger in any one spot too long. Not in this place. And as you walk, you start noticing how the zone feels less like a single location and more like a preview of deep time. Not because every place becomes radioactive. Most do not, but because every place becomes reclaimed eventually. The specifics change, the timeline changes, but the direction is consistent. What is built rises briefly, then sags. What is planted spreads, then is replaced. What is solid cracks, what is sharp rounds off. What is dry floods, what is frozen melts. Even the most permanent-looking things are only stable within a certain slice of time. You keep walking toward the darker outline of trees beyond the buildings, and you can feel the day's remaining heat leaving the surfaces. The air cools and dampness returns, and somewhere in the distance, a bird calls once, then stops. The zone settles into its nightly version of quiet. Not empty, just less visible. And you continue through it, knowing that every step is part of the same long story: water, wind, ice,